The scent of fried dough and cinnamon drifted through the narrow street, curling around the laughter and chatter of the morning crowd. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, feeling the rough fabric scrape against her skin, worn thin from too many washes. The oil in the pan sizzled, bubbling golden around the churros as she turned them with practiced precision. It was still early, but her small cart was already surrounded by a line of regulars, construction workers, students, a few office employees rushing before work. 2 orders, Senora, said a young man with a briefcase. Of course, Carino, she said, smiling. Her voice was soft but steady, the same voice that used to fill grand rooms with laughter. She handed him a paper cone of churros, sprinkled them with sugar, and tucked the few bills into a small tin box. At her feet, 2 small boys, her twins, Mateo and Miguel, were playing with wooden toy cars, racing them along the edge of the sidewalk. They were 6 years old, and their giggles carried like music over the noise of the city. Their dark hair fell in identical waves over their foreheads, their eyes bright with the same spark she saw every time she looked in the mirror. But it wasn't her reflection she saw in them, it was his. Every day, she told herself not to think of Alejandro Vega. The name alone still had power over her heart, stirring the ache she tried to bury beneath sugar and cinnamon. It had been 7 years since the night everything shattered. 7 years since the accusation, the cold silence, the disbelief in his eyes as he told her to leave. 7 years since she'd learned she was carrying his children and realized she'd have to face the world alone. "Mommy, look, mine's faster," Miguel shouted, pushing his car into his brother's. "Yours cheated," Mateo protested, pouting. "Boys, careful," Elena said, laughing despite herself. "If you break those, I'm not buying new ones." She turned back to the fryer, the sunlight glinting off the oil, when a gust of wind swept through the street, lifting a strand of her dark hair across her cheek. She brushed it aside with her wrist, not noticing the sleek black car that had just pulled to the curb. It didn't belong here, too polished, too foreign in this worn neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and painted shutters. The driver stepped out first, speaking into a headset, then opened the rear door. A tall man emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his dark eyes scanning the street with impatience. He looked out of place among the vendors and the clamor. But when his gaze swept across the churro cart, something in his stride faltered. Alejandro froze. He blinked once, twice, as if unsure whether the figure before him was real or an illusion conjured by memory. The woman behind the cart turned, offering a polite smile to her next customer. Her hair was pulled back, her cheeks touched with a faint flush from the heat of the fryer, but even beneath the plain apron and worn shoes, she carried the same quiet grace he remembered. "Elena," he whispered, the name catching in his throat. She didn't see him yet. He stood motionless, the noise of the street fading to a low hum. His heart pounded with confusion, anger, guilt, and something softer he hadn't felt in years. Then the twins looked up. One of them caught his eye, and Alejandro felt his breath stop. The boy's face, those dark eyes, that familiar tilt of the mouth, it was like staring at a smaller reflection of himself. "Senor, would you like to try?" Elena's voice pulled him back. She finally met his gaze. The paper cone trembled slightly in her hand. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The years between them stretched thin, fragile as glass. "Churros," she said finally, her voice barely steady. "Fresh and sweet." Alejandro could only stare. For the first time in 7 years, he realized what he'd lost, and what he might have unknowingly left behind. The air felt heavy with everything unsaid. Alejandro stood there longer than he should have, his mind spinning while his heart refused to obey reason. He had faced boardrooms full of sharks and walked through scandals that could have destroyed empires, yet nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as the sight of Elena standing in front of that cart. She looked at him as if seeing a ghost. For a brief moment, her eyes softened, then the mask slipped back into place. She turned away, pretending to tend to the fryer. "Senor," she said, her tone polite, distant. "Would you like something?" Alejandro found his voice. "2 churros," he said, the words dry in his mouth. She nodded, silent, dropping the dough into the oil. The sizzling sound filled the space between them, sharp and tense. Her hands didn't shake, but he could see the effort it took her to keep them steady. When she handed him the cone, their fingers brushed. His chest tightened. The same warmth, the same spark he remembered, it was still there. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled behind his tongue. "How long have you been doing this?" he finally asked. "Long enough," she said. Her tone was clipped, her eyes fixed on the friar. A small voice interrupted. "Mommy, can we have one too?" Alejandro turned. The twins stood beside the cart now, smiling up at their mother. One of them had sugar dusted across his cheek. The other held a coin tightly in his fist. "Not now, Mateo," Elena said softly. "Go play, mi amor." But the boys didn't move. Instead, they stared at Alejandro, wide-eyed with curiosity. One tilted his head, the same way Alejandro used to when he was trying to understand something. "You have beautiful children," he said before he could stop himself. Elena froze. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. The moment stretched unbearably. Then she nodded, forcing a smile. "Gracias. They're my whole world." He wanted to ask if they were his. He wanted to ask 100 questions. But all he could do was stand there, caught between guilt and disbelief. "Mister, you look like us," Miguel blurted out suddenly, pointing at Alejandro with innocent excitement. Elena's face drained of color. "Miguel," she said sharply. "Don't say that." "But he does, Mommy." The boy insisted. Same eyes, same hair. Alejandro's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. "Maybe we're just both very handsome, he said with a gentle smile. The twins giggled. Elena turned away, blinking fast. She focused on cleaning the friar though there was nothing left to clean. Alejandro straightened, the smile fading from his face. "Elena," he said quietly, "can we talk?" She shook her head, not meeting his eyes. "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about," he insisted, his voice low. "You disappeared without a word." I left because you told me to," she cut in, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "Because you believed lies instead of me." Her words hit him like a blow. The noise of the street felt distant now. All he could hear was her voice, the hurt she'd carried for years. "Elena, I didn't." "No." She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't do this here, please. Not in front of them." He hesitated, then stepped back. The twins were watching, confused. He forced himself to nod. "All right," he said quietly. "But this isn't over." He turned to leave, but something made him glance back one last time. The twins were tugging at Elena's skirt, whispering questions she wasn't answering. She looked so small behind that cart, but her shoulders were squared with pride. As he got into the car, his driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Everything okay, sir?" Alejandro stared out the window, his reflection merging with the image of two small boys laughing beside a churro cart. "No," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Nothing is okay." The car pulled away, but his thoughts stayed behind, echoing with the scent of sugar and oil, and the haunting certainty that those boys weren't just strangers. They were pieces of the life he had thrown away. Alejandro barely slept that night. The city lights flickered across the high windows of his penthouse, but all he could see were two small faces. Those wide, curious eyes, the same dark curls, the way one of them tilted his head exactly as he used to when thinking. He poured himself a drink, left it untouched, and paced the marble floor until dawn. Every thought, every breath, was haunted by the same question: had he been wrong all along? By morning, he'd already called his assistant. "I need everything you can find about Elena Morales. Where she's been, who she's seen, how she survived." Quietly, he ordered. Hours passed before the report arrived. Neatly bound, clinical, filled with details that made his stomach twist. After leaving him, Elena had taken shelter in a church-run home for expectant mothers. She'd given birth to twin boys 6 months later. No father listed. She'd worked odd jobs, moving from town to town, finally settling back in the city 3 years ago. No criminal record, no scandal, just hard work and poverty. And nothing to suggest she had ever betrayed him. He read the report again, slower this time. One line caught his eye: accusations of infidelity initiated by correspondence sent to Mr. Vega's office. Letters later traced to a private investigator hired by Mrs. Vega Sr. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. His mother. The one person he'd trusted blindly. His chest constricted as the truth sank in. Elena had been innocent. The betrayal hadn't been hers. It had been his. He drove straight to the family estate, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. His mother was in the garden, pruning roses, perfectly composed as always. "Alejandro," she greeted him with a smile. "You look troubled. Business problems." He stared at her, silent for a long moment. "You ruined her life." Her hand paused midair. "I beg your pardon, Elena," he said, his voice cold. "You forged those letters. You made me believe she cheated." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "That woman was never right for you," she said smoothly. "She would have destroyed your name, your future. I did what was necessary." He took a step closer. "You destroyed my family." She met his gaze without flinching. "I protected you." The control in his tone finally cracked. "I have sons, mother. 2 boys. They look exactly like me. Do you understand what you took from me?" For the first time, she faltered. Her face paled, her lips tightening. "I didn't know she was pregnant," she whispered. Alejandro turned away, disgust curling through him. "You didn't care." He left her standing among the roses, their scent suddenly cloying and bitter. Back in his car, he stared at the skyline, fury giving way to guilt. Elena had suffered for his blindness, raising their children alone while he lived in luxury. He thought of her tired hands, her quiet dignity, the way she'd refused his pity. He couldn't change the past, but he could make amends. "Find me a way to help her," he told his assistant over the phone. Discreetly. "I don't want her to know it's me." "Not yet." As the car merged into traffic, Alejandro's reflection in the window looked older, wearier, but beneath the guilt, a new resolve burned. He would earn her forgiveness, no matter how long it took. The grand opening of Dos Corazones drew a curious crowd. The new bakery stood on the very corner where Elena's old churro cart had once rattled every morning. The air smelled the same, warm sugar, cinnamon, fried dough, but everything else had changed. The cracked sidewalk had been replaced with polished stone, golden lights shimmered through wide glass windows, and a delicate sign above the door bore 2 interlocking hearts. Elena stood in the middle of it all, her hands trembling slightly as she looked around. The investors who had approached her months ago, anonymous at first, had claimed they'd seen potential in her small business. They'd offered her resources, a location, a chance to rebuild. She'd accepted reluctantly, thinking it was fate giving her one last chance. Only now, standing beneath the sign, did she realize who had truly been behind it all. She turned when she heard footsteps. Alejandro was there, no longer in a suit but a simple shirt and rolled-up sleeves. There was no arrogance in his stance, no trace of the man who had once commanded entire rooms. His eyes were softer now, unsure even, as if afraid she might send him away again. "You did this?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Not for pity," he said quickly. "For you, for them, for what I should have done years ago." Her throat tightened. "You think you can buy forgiveness with bricks and ovens?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "But maybe I can start by helping you build what you deserve." For a moment, neither spoke. The twins were in the back, wearing tiny aprons, proudly offering churros to customers. Their laughter floated through the air, and something in Elena's chest softened despite herself. "You found out," she said finally. "I did. About my mother. About the lies. About what I did to you." His voice broke slightly. "I can never undo it, Elena. But I can make sure you never struggle again." Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them away. "You think that's what I wanted? Money?" "No," he said. "I think you wanted me to believe in you. And I didn't." She turned away, her heart battling between anger and the love she'd buried for too long. The smell of churros filled the silence, sweet and familiar. She remembered the man who had once held her close in a kitchen much like this one, before everything fell apart. The twins ran up then, their cheeks dusted with sugar. "Mommy, Papa taught us how to twist the dough," Mateo announced proudly. Elena froze. The word hung in the air, Papa. Both she and Alejandro looked down at the boys, whose smiles were wide and innocent. Alejandro knelt, his eyes shining. "You can call me that, if you want," he said softly. The twins nodded, giggling, and ran back to the counter. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, the tears finally spilling over. Alejandro stood, uncertain. "I don't expect anything," he said quietly. "But I'll be here, every day, if you'll let me." She stared at him for a long time, her heart aching. Then she picked up a churro, still warm, and handed it to him. "Some things," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "are sweeter the second time around." Alejandro took it, smiling through his tears. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena didn't feel alone. The smell of sugar, laughter, and love filled the air, just as it always should have.